Thank you for welcoming us onto your headphones. I'm Eddie.
And I'm Alex, reviewing Birds of Prey and the fantabulous emancipation of one Harley Quinn, and this is the Rollback.
That is a goddamn mouthful if there's ever been one.
Yeah, we went into the last one, Mobile Suit Gundam Thunderbolt December Sky, for a long title, but this subtitle here gives it a run for its money.
Can I tell you why that title is the way it is?
I just assumed that it was because Harley Quinn was she's sort of a showy character. I thought it was just a reflection of that.
No, so actually the original script was just for Birds of Prey, like that's all it said. And the director wrote in parentheses, and the fantabulous emancipation of one Harley Quinzel. But she wrote that there as like a note to herself, like, "Hey, Harley Quinn's like, you know what I mean?" Like
and
when
they left it in.
Yeah, like right when you write notes in like a book or something. But instead, they looked at it and they were like, "Okay," and then they added that goddamn title to the actual working title, and then it just like, nope, she never corrected them.
Well, I mean that's fair, honestly, because Harley is that sort of the outward expressive personality. It seems right that she would have that title. Plus, she's the biggest part of this movie. I mean, it's called Birds of Prey. This is Harley Quinn too.
What's called? Okay, so let's jump right into it. I make no bones about it. I am a DC fanboy, and I enjoyed this film. You less so.
Yeah, I'm more of a skeptic with regard to the DC movies. I enjoyed the film too. I want to be clear. I thought this was a pretty good movie. But there were definitely some issues here that I think should be parsed. Why don't we get into the plot summary? We can talk a bit more about it.
After a messy breakup with the Joker, Harley Quinn finds out a lot more people want her dead than she thought. When the crime boss known as Black Mask and his right-hand man, Victor Zsasz, want her 86th, her only real chance comes with an unlikely alliance with three other heroines. Harley Quinn joins forces with Black Canary, Renee Montoya, and the Huntress to protect a young Cassandra Cain. Now,
we can start in a film as kind of schizophrenic as this and all over the place. Maybe just at the beginning, we don't even see the Joker. We see rather Harley Quinn giving us her animated backstory. What did you think of that sequence?
I enjoyed it. I actually liked it. I thought it was a good way to show the direction of the film, and the direction of that film is everywhere. How many live-action films often use animation in their opening scene to tell like the backstory of a character? You know, how many live-action films utilize all the tools that film has at its disposal in such a way? You know, the backstory, flashbacks, voiceovers, obviously the cartoon, you know, everything. I liked it. How about you?
So I enjoyed that sequence, but I thought it was kind of emblematic of a bigger problem in the movie. I thought that you could have kept it in just fine, but we're in Birds of Prey. This is definitely Harley Quinn's movie, but they also wanted to introduce all of the other characters in kind of a similar fashion. Everyone gets their sort of origin story either told by Harley Quinn or it's shown on the screen in flashback. When you're having that many origin stories, I think it kind of clogs up the film a bit. Harley's was great. I thought that it was a good way to get around showing Jared Leto and also to kind of show her persistence and the sort of dynamic that she's had with being dependent on men thus far, right? Because it all started with her father, kind of classic, right? Psychology, she's got daddy issues, so she's acting a certain way. But it was the case that her father kept abandoning her and she kept coming back. That's the same thing that she did with the Joker. That's what she's going to try to learn to fight in this movie.
You're not wrong. She has daddy issues, but I think she has, I guess, overarching issues when it comes to her character as a whole. I mean, the whole point of her is that she's broken. And I know that sounds really simple, really simplified, but it's true. Part of the quirkiness that people love about her is her relatability because she's not perfect. She has all these deep flaws, but she's a fun, bubbly personality, not because of what she's been through, but in spite of what she's been through.
I mean, I suppose so. And I'm not saying, that her being dependent like that or her having all these issues is necessarily a bad thing. I'm just saying that that's sort of a motivation. It's definitely something that we've seen in film before. And that's kind of her central conflict in the movie is to try to fight past that, to try to be a little bit more independent of outside influences.
No, that's true. I would say that's accurate to state. You mentioned a lot of how the origin stories didn't really land with you. How come? Like, what did you not like about that?
So the issue with an origin story is that oftentimes it's disconnected from what's actually happening in the movie. So to learn that, Harley Quinn got into that tub of chemicals on the Joker's command, and that she was a therapist, that she had, this tragic backstory, it doesn't necessarily relate directly to, Roman Sionis trying to kill her, or her trying to keep the diamond and Cassandra Cain away from him. They managed to tie it in a little bit, right, by showing that her father kept rejecting her, she kept coming back to him, because that's foreshadowing for what happens in the plot of the movie. But for all of these other characters, like Renee Montoya, Huntress, Black Canary, you have to tell a separate story for each of them, and then they have to have the story that the movie's actually about. It makes it more crowded.
I don't know. Do you think, is it possible that because these characters are very minor, like Renee Montoya is by no means the lead in the film, neither is Black Canary or Huntress, isn't it possible that because their roles are very minor in this film, that their backstories can't afford to be minor? They're very light, if anything at all.
Well, that's actually not exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that, if anything, they were included a little bit too much. I think that the amount of attention that's paid on the origin story of each of these people kind of bloats the film.
Okay, all right, I kind of understand that.
And there's also just the way that it's structured. So we have the movie and director Kathy Yan, who's trying to tell it non-chronologically, who's using a lot of flashback, who's at times literally rewinding the film to go back and show the origin stories for these characters. So we have, at this point, what is that? Black Canary, Huntress, Cassandra Cain, and The Question, Renee Montoya. Those 4 origin stories, along with the film story, being told simultaneously. So a lot of what happened for me was I was getting invested in the Diamond story, the film's main story, and then they would take a break from that and then go and tell another story, and it lost momentum for me when that would happen.
It distracted you that heavily?
I would say so, because a lot of the time, the tone shifts.
Okay, fair enough, fair.
I think you see this a lot, in particular with the Huntress's character, because they try and make it seem almost as if she's in her own separate movie, tonally. And I'm not saying I didn't enjoy her parts in this. The Huntress is one of my favorite characters in this movie, but I am saying that she's got a different thing going on, and it can be jarring when you move over from the Black Mask plot to her backstory and back, and with all these other characters as well.
Let's get into the performances here. Before we go deeper into the plot, Margot Robbie, I made a point of mentioning more than once that she carries this film on her back. Like, she is the core, she is everything about this film. Nothing else in this film would work without not only the Harley Quinn character, but with Margot Robbie playing the character in such a perfect way. Any thoughts on the performance? Any thoughts on how she gelled with her co-stars?
I definitely agree that she's the focal point, and that Margot Robbie is this really charismatic performer in inhabiting this part. Even in my review, I said that until her, it probably wouldn't have been possible to have a standalone Harley Quinn property. It would be like having a story that was just Robin, You could make that, but it wouldn't be as popular as something by Batman or the Joker. Now Harley Quinn is in that same league as the two of them because of Margot Robbie. I think that she works really well in this movie, which is different, I want to point out, than the character of Harley Quinn. I think that the screenwriter, Christina Hodson, mostly does a good job of presenting Quinn as relatable, but I think there are a few points where she goes too far. For me, and I think this might be a point of contention between us, I didn't like that breakfast sandwich sequence. I think that Hodson was trying to make it, she's relatable, she loves food and breakfast, just like, our 76% that we recorded of American viewing audiences. It felt too on the nose. It felt too unsubtle. Like, hey, we are trying to make her relatable. Do you relate to her? She's like you. It just felt forced.
So you felt like it was more of a committee kind of thing to do the whole sandwich versus like, oh, this is just one of her damn quirks. Like everyone
It
has
didn't
one of
feel
those
natural.
things.
Exactly.
Huh. Okay.
Felt-
I guess yeah, you're not wrong. I disagree with you on that. I liked. It wasn't so much that she was like, oh, this sandwich. It was more like just like getting a peek into these little things that you don't get into because this is gonna sound dumb, and I will fully cop to it. The only thing I can ever remember any other DC character showing any kind of intent or love for when it comes to food was Aquaman and Jack Daniels. Like that's it. Like
product placement.
yeah, no, not just the product placement, but just like the fact that like I love this. Like you know, you never see if you ever, and I'll fight anyone on this. I don't ever recall seeing Batman eat or drink anything on film. I don't remember ever seeing Superman do the same thing. I don't remember him eating like a dinner with his family. Like I don't know. I like those little things. It's the little things to me.
Well, the Nolan Batman definitely did have a few scenes where he was, eating and drinking. But I think that it almost proves my point that the fact that you remember another character doing this, but it was product placement, it kind of furthers the point that it's sort of artificial. It was really pushed to the forefront of the audience to say, like, this person is just like you. Which I don't, blame Robbie for. I blame the screenwriter for. I think that was a little bit too much. And this is not a subtle film, right? Harley Quinn is not a subtle person.
I'll give you that. Actually, I remember Nikki, when we went to go watch it, Nikki being my wife, for people who do not know, when the film ended, she actually explicitly said, oh, she got her sandwich. Like, that's nice.
Yeah. It was and that's the thing. I'm not going to knock this movie's writing too much. I think that there are some structural issues, but I think that in details like that, where, you're calling back, I think it does generally a pretty okay job. And as for her interactions with the other cast, you asked about that. I thought it was kind of funny because the birds of prey don't actually assemble until 20 minutes before the film is over. She meets Dina Lance a couple of times. Renee Montoya meets Dina Lance, and the Huntress is just kind of around with people. But assembled together, more than like two people for a couple of scenes, we get 20 minutes of that at the very end.
I mean, to be fair, the Avengers didn't truly assemble until pretty late in the third act.
That is not true. They were all together on the helicarrier.
I mean, in action, they didn't. You know what? I'm not going to compare Birds of Prey to the Avengers. That's a losing battle. Even I'll admit that.
Yeah, because even if they're not coalesced as a team, they're literally on screen together. You can't say that with Birds of Prey. You just can't. That's why I think, I think that's a shame too, because I don't want to just be knocking this movie. I really enjoyed a lot of this cast. Margot Robbie carries it. You're absolutely right. But she's not the only good thing here. I, for instance, really enjoyed Dina Lance, the Black Canary. I thought that, I'm probably going to butcher this pronunciation, but Journey Smollett, maybe it's Journey, I don't know. But I thought that she was really good at being kind of a more subdued character. She's not crazy like Harley, but she's more pragmatic, and she's got a good head on her shoulders. She's very quick thinking. And she has, I think, a good heart, too. You see that when Quinn is in the alleyway, she's being taken advantage of, and Smollett, she intervenes.
Do you think that just comes from an innate want to be a good person? Because, I mean, at one point, Renee Montoya talks to... I'm going to refer to them by their superhero names for the most part. At one point, Renee Montoya confronts her and says, your mom was a hero. Like, why don't you join us? Why don't you help us?
Right. And, of course, Canary has that sort of venom biting back. She was left out to die, essentially. Because what we'll learn about her power is that it's kind of a one-use only. She, I believe she falls unconscious after she uses it. Is that right?
She does, although I wonder if that's just from, I guess, not practicing. Because, I mean, I'm trying to remember. What was it? I think the very first time the Flash ever uses his powers, at least I know in the animated series, he like straight up like can't walk anymore, like the first time, because he's never used it. It's like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the more you can use it.
I mean, that's fair. Although I will say the animated series is kind of a different animal than what we're looking at here.
Yeah, but I mean, it'd be a pretty bad one-trick pony if Black Canary can only use her sonic scream once, once and then recoup.
But that's what's happening in the film. That's what it is.
No, but I think in the long term, I think eventually she'll get better at it. But that's speculating on something that's not mine.
I mean, it's possible. I just think that that's kind of the situation that her mother was in. Because she tells Montoya that she basically wasn't given support, right? She was with the police, but the police weren't able to save her for whatever reason.
And then, what did you think of the Huntress's character? Like, before we get into the meat of Black Mask, what did you think of Huntress?
I really enjoyed Huntress. Mary Elizabeth Winstead comes in as her, and she's got this intensity, but at the same time, she comes off as a Batman who enjoys her job. I think, personally, we get too little of her in the movie. She plays an orphan raised by assassins as awkwardly as she would be in real life. She has essentially no people skills. She has this mask of a face most of the time. And she's just entertaining to watch, especially in action scenes, of course, because she has her tricked out crossbow. She's doing really well in her fight sequences. It was really entertaining to see her. I thought that she was her or Lance was probably my favorite bird.
At the very end, there's this golden interaction, and to me, it's not the highlight of the film. There's so many parts of this film that I enjoy. But one of the scenes that gave me the most, laughs was at the very end when they're all at the taco place, eating. And she's just so awkward, like talking to Black Canary, like, yeah, I like the way you punch that dude. You throw punches really good. Like, it's so awkward, but it's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why I say that it's a shame that these characters are only together for the last 20 minutes or so. And even during that 20-minute block, Harley Quinn still goes off alone to have, the showdown with Sionis. She leaves the other birds behind. So they're not together very long at all, which is a shame because I really enjoyed them. Mm-hmm. I think that part of what DC is trying to do here is trying to prove that we can do a good superhero team up in the DCEU because of, the issues with Justice League. Things have been not quite working out the way that they want to because there's been backlash on, for instance, Batman versus Superman. I think that they wanted to really knock this one out of the park and say, yes, we can bring these different personalities together and have them gel on screen. And I think they succeed, but for so little of the film that it almost doesn't count.
I think part of it was also the writing and the runtime. This is by far the shortest DCEU film, clocking in at only an hour and 49 minutes. Bear in mind, Batman v Superman, there's a cut that's over 3 hours long.
Yeah, I've heard of that one. Yeah, and that's also, we talked last episode about how Mobile Suit Gundam Thunderbolt December Sky might have benefited from a little bit more time being added to the film. That was my take. Or your take, the focus of the film being different for the time that was there. I think that if you had cut on these origin stories, maybe you could have had more of this group chemistry that's working really well. Or, you can go in the other direction. Maybe make it a 2-hour film and give us more of them together.
Well, I mean, also, I think the writing wouldn't let them all be together. Like, literally at the very end, they only come together not because they want to, but out of necessity. They're not like, hey, we all should team up to take on it. It's like, no, our backs are against the wall. We're about to be killed. The only shot we got is to go in this together. And they're not meant to get along. They're not meant to be, teammates. We got a cop, a known supervillain that probably has a body count that puts Ed Gein to shame, and probably H.H. Holmes as well. We have a singer with a metahuman power, and then a girl who was trained in the language of murder.
I mean, yes, but I also think that you're underestimating what good writing can do for a movie. You're saying that these people are only together because their backs are against the wall. That's true in the movie we got, but it doesn't have to be true necessarily. I mean, a lot of these characters knew each other from beforehand. We had Renee Montoya, who knew Dina Lance, who knew Cassandra Cain. We had Harley, who knew Dina Lance. And then the Huntress has been kind of involved in all of their stories. I think there's definitely a way to bring their narrative threads together sooner. And as far as them being different, I mean, yeah, absolutely. But look at, for instance, the Justice League. There are two aliens on the same team as a human mermaid and a rich boy. There are ways to bring disparate people, even more different than this group, together. And I think that they could have done that in this film. I think that Christina Dodson and Kathy Yan went a different way with it. And that's why we get very little of what I think is the best part of the movie, which is all of them together.
Do you hope they are going to make a sequel? There's no question about that. They are going to do a sequel. Because although, and I'll give anyone this, while it just broke even at the box office, the merchandise sales by far give it a reason to have a sequel. Do you want Kathy Yang to return? Maybe take the lessons she learned from Birds of Prey and, obviously improve the film?
Oh, well, that's kind of a dangerous thing to assume, that a filmmaker learns a lesson. But yes, I would be interested in seeing what she's got, because a lot of this movie almost felt like homework. It almost felt like we have to do this list of things and then we can have Birds of Prey. You do your chores, you get a nice little treat, you go through all of these origin stories for all these different characters, and you break the film's momentum, and then you can finally have a nice story. All of that is done with now. The next Birds of Prey, I think, would be improved upon just by not having all this baggage of having to introduce all these different characters. I think that when it's established, even a very trite sort of way of bringing them together, very basic sort of, oh, there's this other threat. Well, we need some help. Who do we know to call? It's Harley. Oh, they're together now. Even something as basic as that would be good because it brings them together and I enjoy seeing them together.
What did you think of Renee Montoya? Like her character, because we've talked about Huntress a little bit. We've talked about Black Canary a little bit. We've talked about Harley quite a bit. What did you think of Renee Montoya?
I didn't like her as much. Out of all the birds, she's probably my least favorite, depending on if you want to count Cassandra Cain. But she's also very subdued, but unlike Black Canary, she's not as entertaining to watch, in my opinion. Harley Quinn even introduces her as a cliche, saying she's seen too many 80s cop movies. But that's not really a personality. Her being kind of just this tough cop who fights for justice, that's a stock character. That's one that we've all seen before. And I don't feel that in the film she ever grows past it. And it may be that they wanted to do more with her that was cut, because, she has this very small mention of her alcoholism and the fact that her ex works for the DA's office. It felt like maybe they had been considering doing more with her. But for me, she just doesn't work, and they don't do much with her character. Rosie Perez does fine in portraying her, but I think Hodson's writing lets the character down.
I don't know. I think I disagree with that. There are glimpses of her character, I guess that breakthrough. Points where she's more than willing to give up her badge and her gun because this is bullshit, you're not doing the right thing. Calling out the captain. Yes, they give her some backstory with her and the DA being exes. I feel like, to me, that's not necessarily just, oh, this is included. I feel like that's adding to her character. She puts her job before everything else. And it's mentioned, but also there are consequences to those actions.
But what I'm saying is, she's introduced as someone who's seen too many 80s cop movies. She acts just like a character in any of those. To the handing in of the badge and gun that you've seen for over 40 years now in cinema. She doesn't make herself different in any way that I can see.
Fair. I'll give you that. And then I guess I will agree with you on this. Cassandra Cain's character is thinner than a shortcut sheet of paper. But let's go on.
Yeah. Ella J. Basco plays Cassandra Cain, and who's this sort of disaffected pickpocket, aspiring criminal. She's Harley Quinn's sidekick, really. Her delivery of lines I thought was kind of odd, and I thought that, especially in the fun house where they're together for the first time, where she has a gun on them, I thought her delivery was really stilted. I just thought that her performance was kind of stiff.
So she was by far your least favorite of the birds?
If you want to count her as a bird, then yeah, I would say so.
Are you aware of the Cassandra Cain? So I'm going to go full nerd on you partially. Are you aware of her character in the actual comics?
Yeah, I believe we've even discussed off the podcast a time or two. She essentially was raised by assassins and like not taught to speak, right?
Yeah, she wasn't even taught to speak. She was just taught to fight. Basically, she's Huntress.
Yeah, and I don't think that you could have had that backstory and still made it a comedy, but it would have been like a different sort of a comedy. It would have been a much darker thing to put that character in this movie. I can definitely see why they made her a pickpocket. I just think that their casting was off. Or maybe Kathy Ann, maybe she's not used to directing people this young.
No, definitely so. I think if you're going to work with a kid, you want to make sure you know the exact direction that you're going in. I liked her interactions with Harley Quinn, but now that I'm thinking about it, Margot Robbie kind of carried those interactions very much with her words. It was 90% Harley, maybe 10% Cass.
Agreed. And also, I wanted to ask, because one of the scenes that I liked the least was of the two of them, and I'll get into why, but first I want to ask you, what did you think of the voiceover in the film?
I liked it. I didn't think it was annoying. I think it was, and I know a lot of people look at it as a lazy tool when writing to be voiceovers. But I didn't see it as a lazy tool. I saw it more like in a sense of The Wolf of Wall Street or American Psycho. And I know those are two very high films I'm comparing it to. But I liked it because it didn't necessarily push the narrative forward. It more or less gave us an insight into the character. And to me, good voiceovers, that's what they do. They don't push the narrative. They tell the story of the character. And I felt like we got more of a glimpse into Harley Quinn, who she is as a person because of that. They lifted it from the Deadpool bag of tricks.
Sure. And I agree that I don't think it was a bad choice to use voiceover, right? A lot of people, yes, will say that it's lazy because it basically allows you to just say what a character is thinking rather than having them express it. But I think that in this film, with the way that they use it, it gives it a sort of a noir feel. I think that they have a little bit of that concept in the movie. However, I think sometimes that they overdo it, and this is kind of a running theme for me with the film. It's a little bit excessive, which brings me back to one of my least favorite scenes. It's with Cassandra Cain and Harley when they're in her apartment. They're laughing, they're having fun, they're playing around, watching TV, and the voiceover says, "It was kind of nice having the kid around." To me, that almost speaks to not having faith in the movie when you have to emphasize something that is clearly happening on screen. Yeah, I get that Harley likes having the kid around because Margot Robbie is doing her job and giving a good performance, and Ella J. Basco is also being good in this scene, but the voiceover in that instance and a couple of others ruins it because it's just describing what we see anyway.
Maybe it was just a reminder, because you do notice at a lot of these pivotal scenes when things change direction. That's when Harley kind of speaks up and says, well, this, and this. She kind of gives her 2 cents and everything. But
it's not a reminder, though, because the thing that you're being reminded of is happening currently.
Not necessarily that it should have been natural, but that they felt like, hey, we're supposed to include her in this part.
Suppose. Now, what did you think of the music to the film?
So one complaint I heard about Suicide Squad and one complaint I heard about Birds of Prey, both happen to feature Margot Robbie and Harley Quinn, was, to quote a person, there doesn't have to be a song for every scene. I get it, but I was entertained by it. The only time that ever really threw me off was one of the scenes I was actually kind of looking forward to, was the scene where they remixed Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. That's the only time it ever threw me off.
Right. And actually, I had wanted to get your take about that sequence in particular. But first, we can finish discussing this music. I agree. The music didn't feel as excessive to me as some of the other elements. I mostly wasn't thinking of it. There were a couple of cases where I thought you could have chosen a better song there. The remixes in particular, I thought that music supervisors, Gabe Hilfer and Susan Kent, they could have done better. And some of the music is a little too on the nose. Like when Canary is singing, This Is a Man's World in the club.
Oh, yes, I remember that. I actually liked her rendition of it.
I thought it sounded nice. I thought the choice of lyrics was just too on the nose. The movie is called The Fantabulous Emancipation of Her Right. You probably don't need to be so on the nose and so forceful in reminding us of the central conflict. It's hand holding is what it is. And other times the soundtrack does the same thing by saying like the joke's on you. It's a little too much in those cases. Not the use, but kind of the songs that they go for.
No, I was gonna say, did you think that perhaps they used This Is a Man's World not just to be heavy-handed in what they're trying to say, but also just for name recognition alone? Because I think This Is a Man's World is one of the few songs that I think people from damn near any genre will recognize instantaneously because of how heavy it is, how well known it is. I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone that's never at least heard a version of that song.
I haven't.
Really?
This was my first time hearing it. You may be absolutely right about that.
What rock are you from?
Excuse you. But and you may be right about that. It may be that they were going for name recognition, and that anyone else that you ask, anyone else that's hearing this has like heard like, oh yeah, I've heard that song a million times. This is my first time hearing it. So it could be. I just found it a little heavy-handed, but I'm sure that if other people have heard it before, maybe they don't feel the same.
So, fun thing real quick, I just Googled it, and there's literally about 15 different versions, like, on the very first link when you Google it. This is
I believe you. Sure.
There's so many of them, wow. I'm sorry, go on.
No, that's fine. But going back to that sequence, if I recall correctly, the Black Mask slaps Quinn, and then she goes into this sequence. Is that right? That's how it goes?
He slaps her or punches her or something. She gets a bloody lip, and then like the cuckoos are going around her head, and she zones out, and then she's in that setting. That
felt out of place to me, and I'll tell you why I think that is. I think that maybe in some draft of the script, maybe or something that they edited out, maybe she was meant to work for Sionis like more sincerely than she does. Because in the movie, as we have it now, she says, "Yeah, I'll bring you the diamond," but she's still trying to protect the kid. Other than her selling out at the very end out of desperation, I don't think that she's ever really on Roman's side. Do you think that maybe in an earlier draft she was meant to be? Like there was meant to be that sort of control? Because that sequence just seemed almost like she was being brainwashed. And also the fact that later in the film, when it's just her and Roman, he yells at her, "You can't stand on your own, and you need me." I think those two lines are sort of also out of place in the movie as it is, but they both make more sense if there had ever been a subplot about her being on his side sincerely.
If you know the characters, and I need to dip into that for my reasoning, if you know the characters and their backstory, Harley Quinn and Black Mask do not go very well together at all. There's no real infatuation between the two. And as a matter of fact, going back into the pre-production and when they actually screened the film, for test audiences, there was actually a romance, a bit of a, not romance, that's the right phrase. There was some flirtation, maybe even a hint of a relationship between Black Mask or Roman Sionis and Victor Zsasz. That was borderline, I guess, sexual, but they cut it from the film because they felt like it threw off the film a little too much. It didn't feel natural. So no, I'm not inclined to believe that there's any version of this film where they were meant to, be working together very close.
Now, what you say about pre-production, that absolutely makes sense. But as for the comic, I don't necessarily think that we can look at those as a source for anything but the broadest of strokes. I mean, look at what they did to Cassandra Cain, It's different.
That's true. That's very, very, very true.
Or even like Renee Montoya, she doesn't really have a lot of the elements that would make her the Question in this movie, whereas in the comics, she's like, a protege of the original Question, etc.
Very true.
But yeah, as far as your pre-production research goes, that makes more sense then. In that case, the line and that sequence just feel out of place in the movie to me.
No, I'll give you that. That scene did feel out of place. I think it might have been just because they needed a section to throw that in, um, or maybe it was because they wanted to make it seem like this is something that Harley Quinn does, but they didn't do it multiple times throughout the film of like these weird daydream, deja vu song sequences. If they had done it a few times throughout the film, I would have been like, okay, I kind of get it a little more now. Like, when she gets knocked out or she sees in music, if that makes sense.
Yeah, or you could have even used it to strengthen her plot line. If she's having these like visions when she's struck by men, then that kind of furthers the idea that no, she needs to fight for her independence. This is what she's struggling against. But they don't really do that here.
Actually, now that you mention it, now that I'm thinking about it, they could have had it to where it happens a few times in the film where she's struck and she goes into this musical sequence. But in the very last, obviously in the third act of the film, when her and Black Mask are squaring off and Cassandra is there, and they could have made it to where Black Mask hits her, but for the first time of the film, she doesn't go into the song sequence. She's awake. She's still there. And she's like, no, fuck this, and keeps going.
It would have showed her development a little bit more clearly, I think.
Yeah.
With us on the subject, I wanted to ask about the major player we haven't talked about. What did you think about General Kenobi? I mean, Black Mask.
I thought General Kenobi has had one too many hits. I really liked it. It was as charismatic. He's pulling. I don't know if this is me, if this is a wrong thing to say or not, but he's pulling his best Joker impression. He plays. Bear in mind, I know I'm talking smack about something I love. He plays a better Joker than Jared Leto did in Suicide Squad, and bear in mind, it's not really a fair comparison. He's manic, he's crazy, he's off the wall. He actually displays a lot of traits of Charles Manson, actually. His charismatic vibe, the manner in which he conducts himself, the way he just twists and turns. At one point he orders the death of a young girl just because she has a snot bubble.
Yes, because it offends him. He thinks it's disgusting. I think that I get what you're saying, and I think they're definitely making him Joker adjacent, right? To give him that comparison to have Quinn fight against. I don't think he's a one-for-one Joker, just because he has almost a bipolar disorder going on, wherein he'll be like really nice and pleasant to Dina and like show her all of his antiques and artifacts, and then the next second he'll be really angry. But he has a little bit more control than the Joker does, I would say.
No, you're definitely right there. Another thing about this performance, Ewan McGregor, apparently he had a lot of input on the character. They took, and I'm trying to be gracious when I say this, they took a bit of an Iron Man approach to the film in a sense that they had like a bare bones outline of what to say and what to do, but they very much let the actors themselves fill in the blanks.
Which is good. I think that a large part of this movie is comedy, and when you want to kind of give a comedic energy, one route that you can go is to give the actors a lot of leeway if they're funny people to say like, hey, feel free to do some improv, be in the scene, inhabit the character, and this is what they would say, and this is what makes the scene funny. I think that a lot of the jokes do work, but as with a lot of the other elements in the film, I think that sometimes it's excessive. Like, crude humor is one thing, right? I think that crude humor can work really well in a film like this one. I think that trying to do the Deadpool thing is probably the right instinct, but sometimes it feels like they're just using fuck as a crutch,
Mm-hmm.
as though they can't write an actual joke, so they just cover it up with vulgarity.
You're not wrong. I think they felt like they had to justify being a rated R film, which is unfortunate because I didn't think they had to be. I think if they had just toned down on the cursing and like
Mhm.
slightly toned down on the violence, it would have been fine. Like instead of cutting off the guy's face, slit his throat, you can do like a blood spurt, and that's still technically PG-13. You can spin that.
You could probably even do the face thing to show it from the back of his head.
Jesus, yeah, I mean you're not wrong. You're not wrong. They probably could have made this film PG-13 and made a lot more money. This reminds me of something because we're talking
Mhm.
about the violence. What did you think of the action sequences?
I was about to ask you. Now, for me, I thought that the action was mostly forgettable. I thought that they had some interesting set pieces. So the fun house, that can be a really interesting thing because you have all these kinetic pieces and people moving across them. But I think that it falls into the pit that a lot of superhero movies, and I'm counting even Marvel movies. I'm a bit of a Marvel fanboy, but they have this problem for sure, which is that they don't have, maybe it's the time, maybe it's the effort to put through the star in full choreography for the sequence. So they hide around it by using a lot of those quick cuts. And
Mm-hmm.
whenever a movie does that, it just makes it that much more forgettable for me. Now, that's not the entire film. There are a couple of really bright spots that made me disappointed that I wasn't getting more. One of them was when Black Canary is in the alleyway saving Quinn from that, kidnapper who's going to kill her. Um, she does like a Chun Li kick and just wrecks the guy. That was extremely entertaining to watch. Another great part is Harley Quinn's assault on the police station, where she walks in with a beanbag grenade launcher. I mean, how iconic, right? What did you think of the violence?
Um, and this is just a me thing. I always have a thing about the knees. Like my thought process always go for the knees. Like no one ever does in every film, every action film. For real. It's a running joke I always have with Nikki or anyone I go to the movies. If I see a fight scene, I'm just always thinking, kick him in the knee. He can't fight if he can't walk. And
Mhm.
he can't stand. He can't throw a punch. And this film had a lot of knee breaking. Just to start, I winced every time, and there was a lot of them.
That's true.
Um,
That is true, definitely.
but as far as the action sequences are concerned, I don't think they were forgettable at all. I massively enjoyed them. I think there was a lot of good use of area and your props in the funhouse. I think the action sequence, in particular in the police station, was funny. Like they used a beanbag shotgun to the best of their abilities, but it worked. It worked. It made me laugh, and it made me even go, I understand why you're passed out, man. That must suck, getting shot in the face by a beanbag. Um, the Overall, I like the action sequences. I thought they were memorable. I thought they used Harley Quinn to the best of her abilities because she's a gymnast. She's an acrobat. She's not the strongest, but she can
Right.
probably punch pretty damn hard, and she'll use her body weight against you.
Exactly. It's almost kind of a judo moveset where they are kind of aiming for weak points and using opponents' force against them. So you and I kind of agree about the police station. About the funhouse, I would just say that it doesn't matter where you're having the fight. If there's a really interesting piece in the scene, like the funhouse, rides or little elements, if you don't show it, if you just show an initial shot and then show a guy getting punched after you cut, then it doesn't matter where the fight is taking place, in my opinion, because it all feels the same. But which is why I enjoyed the alleyway and the police station raid. Those didn't feel like that at all. It felt as though Margot Robbie really had that choreography down.
You didn't like the fact that they used the funhouse, like they used different elements of the funhouse, whether it be where Huntress is jumping up and down all those weird tongue things, or Renee Montoya's fighting in the Hall of Mirrors. You didn't enjoy that?
No, because of the way that it was shot.
Oh, really? Okay. Huh.
Because
Well,
they didn't shoot it in such a way where the focus is on the actress accomplishing the move and taking the opponent down. They did the thing where person swings a punch, cut, a person's getting hit, which feels like every action movie that doesn't have the time or the money to actually have its stars or its stunt people go through the sequence.
what did you think? Because I think we both got a feel that they were doing some homages during the film. What did you think about all that?
So I thought that they were kind of gunning for Deadpool's space. Harley Quinn is similarly ultra-violent, makes, crude jokes, trying to be really funny, winks at the camera, sometimes literally. I don't think that it was executed as well as Deadpool, though. And I think that with Deadpool and with Birds of Prey, they're on a certain spectrum, right, between an action movie and a comedy. I think Deadpool was more toward a comedy, whereas Birds of Prey was trying to be more action-heavy. I didn't think it did quite as well. They're also, with the storytelling, right, and the schizophrenic, back and forth cuts and flashbacks and the timeline, I thought they were also going for a Tarantino vibe. The major difference, though, is that Tarantino can kind of take stories in a couple of different places, but it never feels like the movie isn't moving forward for me, at least generally with his pictures. It feels like it keeps its momentum. I didn't necessarily feel that way about Birds of Prey.
I felt like it was, and I saw this from someone else's review. I can't remember the source, but they described it as Tarantino and Deadpool fused at the hip. And I feel like that's generous, but I also see it. Like, I didn't notice it until afterwards. You see a lot of the marks of a Tarantino film and the marks of a Deadpool film in this. From, yes, the ultra-violence to Harley Quinn, you breaking the fourth wall a lot. The obsession with food, which is a Tarantino thing. Luckily, they didn't go all in on the feet thing, which would have been freaking weird.
Yeah, would have lost some focus there.
Definitely so. Also, what's one thing that also we didn't talk about that I'm just realizing we should? None of the characters in this film are overly sexualized, and I think that's because of who directed it. It was a woman that directed this film. She made a point because I don't remember what podcast it was, but she was actually asked, her and Margot Robbie were actually both asked, Harley Quinn's outfit in this film is very conservative compared to her, Suicide Squad outfit, which was just her in very, very small pants and, fishnet stockings. And they said, well, because no one would actually fight in clothes like that. Like, no one would actually wear that in a fight. They're not trying to be overly sexualized.
Frankly, it's a ridiculous question to ask. I feel at times like only the media could concoct a thing like that. Because as much as I've had, disagreements with the directions that Jan has taken the movie or that Hodson has written into it, I think that that's a direction that we can both agree with. I think that, she's on the run. She's going across half the city. She owns a hyena in her apartment. Fashion is not necessarily going to be the utmost priority. And neither are these, the combat ineffective 6-inch high heels that you might see for other heroines. And the thing that I enjoy is that she definitely has a sense of style. She was using caution tape as almost like pauldrons or pom-poms in an outfit at one point. She's got her own trashy sensibility. But no, sexualizing her character or the other characters, it would have felt really unnecessary.
Bit of a side note. Did you know that Zack Snyder actually received some backlash for the way the Amazons were dressed in the Justice League film?
I did not know that.
It's because so they shot Justice League right after Wonder Woman had just finished filming, right? Mm-hmm. And the director, actually, I believe it's Patty Jenkins, she was actually on set for Justice League, visiting, doing oh, hey, how are you, Zach, whatever. And she actually said, hey, we still have the costumes from Wonder Woman, right? You don't have to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars making leather bikinis for these women. We have the costumes. And Zack Snyder, I don't want to say his response was yeah, but they're not sexy. But it was something along the lines of well, no, we're going to go with this because this is what I want.
Part of it, to be generous to Schneider, which is an odd thing to hear myself say. But I think part of it also might have been with them trying to ensure box office for Justice League. I mean, I guess when, you have a movie you've invested that much in, you want to make sure that you're hitting every demographic, and that includes, eye candy for the 13 to 18-year-olds. That would be, I guess, my most generous motivation for something like that happening. But honestly, it would have felt gratuitous in this movie, as I'm sure it did there.
Yeah, but no, I like the costume choices. Did you also know that? Yeah, I'm just becoming a fun facts thing here on the rollback. Deadpool and Harley Quinn are actually one of the most shipped couples on the internet.
I didn't know that. It doesn't surprise me at all, though. People love doing that.
No, but I think that's one of the reasons why Deadpool was such a heavy influence, because they have very similar personalities, very quirky, very off the wall in every direction. You literally don't know what Deadpool's going to do next. To some degree, same thing with Harley. I mean, she got a freaking spotted hyena as a pet.
And she named it after Bruce, which is hilarious. That was one of my favorite jokes. You're viewing it more from a story perspective. Whenever I hear something like that, to me, it automatically goes back to the box office. I'm just a bit cynical in that way. I would only imagine that the people behind the DCEU are saying, oh, well, Deadpool basically led the way, and we know that a character like this can be successful. We've got one of our own. Let's get that market share.
Definitely. But you see, it's odd to me, though, that they didn't put this film, I guess, closer to a summer release date, or like in March. February is a bit of a dead month. You don't see big box office shows, with the understandable exception of Black Panther. You don't see very many films break even like the $500 million mark in February. I just thought it was a bit of an odd placement for this film.
Well, it seems to me, just from hearing that maybe they wanted to kind of not ride the coattails of or imitate the success of, but maybe they were trying to pull off something similar to Black Panther. With Black Panther, you have a minority-led film. He's, I would say, the preeminent black superhero in the Marvel universe, right? And he has this other tone that he's tapping into for his movie, because that's kind of a different movie than the other Marvel ones. It's a very good film. I enjoyed it. I think they might have been trying to do a similar thing with Harley Quinn, female-led movie. And DCEU has had that. But maybe they were trying to replicate that success by standing out in February.
And I hope they learned their goddamn lesson. This film deserved much better than just a measly $200 million at the goddamn box office.
Well, to be fair, if they had waited longer, it might not have come out.
If Wonder Woman does come out in June, I don't care if there's a goddamn pandemic. I'm going to go watch it. I will sneak out if I have to.
You have fun. I'll be streaming it.
You bastard. You pay your good money like the rest of us.
Yikes, no.
So we talked about the stunts. We talked about the actors. Overall, when you take all these elements together, what is the film, final grade, final verdict? What does the film, say to you? Or what would you say about the film?
I would say that it's enjoyable. It works as, some fairly light entertainment. But Harley Quinn, I would struggle to say that she actually has a fantabulous emancipation throughout the movie. I feel like they don't necessarily put the pieces together to give her that full character arc. She ends the movie in many ways the same way that she began. She's alone at the beginning. She's mainly alone at the end. She's made some friends, but she leaves them just like she leaves that group of women at the beginning. And what's more, she steals their car, showing that she's still a criminal. Friendship hasn't really changed her in that way. And the only thing different about her is that now she has someone to teach to become just like her. In her own words, she's only a less terrible person by the end of the movie. I think that Birds of Prey has a lot of elements that work, but I think that a lot of the times they go too far. It's too excessive with some of it, and a lot of the parts that I don't get enough of, like the group being all together. So overall, it's definitely worth watching. It's definitely pretty entertaining, but it was really disappointing precisely because of how much it almost gets exactly right. I gave that a C+.
Fair. That's okay. we have different takes on this film. That's fair. That's okay.
What's your final verdict?
And again, I recognize I am biased. I give it an A just because I was so entertained by this film. A lot of what DC did in the beginning stages of the DCU was very dark, heavy, not very many jokes, maybe like 2 or 3 in the entire film. So this film was everything Suicide Squad should have been. A lot of jokes, a lot of laughter, a lot of lighthearted banter, and I love the fact, and I didn't mention this, the world was not in danger. There was never a time where it's like either we win or the world dies. It's like, no, all that's at stake is a diamond in this kid's life. You know,
You just like low stakes, though.
no, I like low stakes because it's every film. Like the other day, I saw Rampage. It somehow it goes from like, oh man, they're fucking up Chicago, to The Rock saying, all right, Joe, all right, George, let's go save the world. I'm tired of world destructive movies. Like, no. Can't it just be like a nice, some people might die kind of thing? Like, can't we just have a low body count for once?
I think you might be watching the wrong type of movies.
We're watching very different types of movies.
I mean, you're going to like Godzilla and Rampage and expecting the stakes to be small.
No, I like the fact that it was low stakes, and overall, I like the film. I gave it an A. I recognize my bias. I'm not sorry. No part of me ever will be.
Yikes. If you're listening to us on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe.
If you're listening to us via podcast, please subscribe. We'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. If you'd like to hear more about our thoughts on movies, go to therollback.net. I've been Eddie.
And I've been Alex, and this was The Rollback.